They laughed. God, the sound of it still rings in my ears, sharp, echoing off the marble walls of the courthouse like glass breaking. I remember clutching my purse so tightly that the little recorder inside pressed a perfect circle into my palm. I could feel its edges even through the leather. The judge looked at me over his glasses, patient but condescending, and said, "This isn't a movie, ma'am." The courtroom chuckled. Even my sister, my own sister, covered her mouth to hide a smile. I wanted to disappear. You'd think by 48, humiliation wouldn't sting so sharply. You'd think after raising 2 kids, surviving 15 years of a marriage that drained the life out of me, I'd have built some kind of armor. But that morning, sitting in that courtroom, every layer of pride peeled off one by one, until all that was left was a trembling woman clutching a recorder no one believed in. Everyone said I was paranoid. My ex-husband's lawyer said it first, smirking, smooth, a voice like a radio host. "Mrs. Lane," he'd said during the deposition, "you really think people are conspiring against you?" I didn't answer. Because yes, I did. I just couldn't prove it yet. I remember the first time I decided to record something. It was a Tuesday night. Michael, my ex, had been drinking again. He'd started one of his usual tirades about money, about how I was lucky he let me stay in the house until the divorce was finalized. He slammed his fist into the kitchen counter right next to my hand so hard that the plates rattled. Our daughter, Emily, had run upstairs crying. The next morning, he made pancakes. Called me sweetheart, like nothing happened. That's when I realized the scariest kind of liar isn't the one who hides his cruelty. It's the one who convinces everyone else it never existed. So yes, I started recording, quietly at first, on my phone, tucked in my robe pocket, then later with a cheap digital recorder I bought online for $39. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just needed proof of something, of me not losing my mind. When my sister found out, she laughed. "Oh, come on, Hannah. You sound like one of those women on those true crime podcasts," she said over dinner. "You think Michael's plotting against you? He's not that smart." I smiled like it didn't bother me. But that night I cried into my pillow until I couldn't breathe. Michael was smart. Brilliant, actually, at least at pretending. He was the kind of man who helped neighbors fix their sprinklers, who donated to the local youth center. Everyone loved him. When I finally told my mother I thought he was hiding money, she looked at me with pity, not concern, pity, and said, "Honey, maybe you should stop overthinking. You always did imagine the worst. That's what they do to you." People like him. They don't just lie. They reshape your reality until you start doubting your own memory. Every conversation becomes foggy. Every instinct feels shameful. You start apologizing for things you didn't even do. By the time the court date arrived, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I sat at that long, polished table, staring at the man I used to call my husband. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that says you'll lose again. My lawyer, a kind but overworked woman named Karen, whispered, "Just keep calm, Hannah. The truth always wins." The truth? I wanted to laugh in her face. Truth was useless without proof. And proof was exactly what everyone mocked me for collecting. When Michael's lawyer started questioning me, he made a performance out of it. "So," he said, pacing the floor, "you've been recording conversations. Is that correct?" I nodded. He tilted his head. "Even private ones?" "I only recorded what I was a part of," I said, my voice barely audible. He raised his eyebrows, pretending to be shocked. "So, just to be clear, you were secretly recording your husband?" Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Someone snickered. That's when I saw Emily, my daughter, sitting behind him. She wouldn't meet my eyes. The air left my lungs. I wanted to explain. To tell her I wasn't crazy, I wasn't cruel, I wasn't trying to ruin her father. I just wanted the truth. But how do you explain survival to someone who's been fed your villainy for months? The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Lane, this is not an espionage case. Please refrain from turning these proceedings into theatrics." More laughter. I stared at the recorder in my purse. That tiny piece of plastic felt like my last tether to reality. I wanted to throw it away, to surrender, To stop fighting a battle no one even believed existed. But then I remembered the night Michael called me unfit. The way he hissed, "No one's going to believe you. You sound insane." I remembered the way Emily flinched when I raised my voice, not because she was scared of me, but because she'd been told I was dangerous. That memory burned through my humiliation like a spark through paper. So when the judge said, "Do you have anything else to say, Mrs. Lane?" I took a breath. My hand slipped into my purse, fingers brushing the smooth recorder. "I do," I said softly. Karen looked at me, alarmed. "Hannah, don't—" But I was already pressing the button. I heard the faint click. The little red light blinked to life. In that moment, I didn't care if they laughed again. I didn't care if they called me paranoid or dramatic or broken. I just needed one thing: to be heard. And as the room fell quiet, I whispered, mostly to myself, but maybe to them too, "You'll hear me soon enough." The night before the final hearing, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by stacks of papers and empty mugs that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The house was too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. Every creak in the walls sounded like judgment. Every tick of the clock reminded me how long I'd been fighting a battle no one else could even see. I pressed play on one of the recordings, my voice small and shaking. "Michael, please, we need to talk about what happened with Ethan's leg." His voice followed, smooth, almost bored. "You worry too much, Hannah." It's handled. That word, handled, had haunted me for months. Because what he meant was hidden. I closed my eyes, resting my head on the table as the tape played on. I hated hearing myself beg. I sounded like a stranger, weak, apologetic, desperate to please the man who'd already decided I was disposable. At some point, the tears stopped falling. I just sat there staring at the little red light blinking on the recorder. My mind started spinning with all the things I'd been called: dramatic, unstable, obsessive. Words that cut deeper than any insult because they'd been spoken by people I loved. There's a particular loneliness that comes from being disbelieved. It's not just isolation, it's erasure. You start to vanish from your own story. That night, I almost deleted everything. I hovered over the button, thumb trembling. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was crazy. What kind of sane woman spends her nights cataloging pain? But then I remembered Emily's face after the accident. How she'd looked at me, wide-eyed, when the doctor said the hospital bills had never been submitted. "Dad said you were supposed to handle it," she'd whispered. I'd gone cold. Michael had promised to take care of the paperwork. He'd blamed me instead. And I'd said nothing because he'd already convinced everyone I couldn't be trusted. That was the night he told me, "You're lucky I don't tell the court how unfit you are." I pressed play again, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I needed to remember who the liar was. By the time the sun rose, I was hollow. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. I packed the recorder, the cables, the original files, every shred of truth I had left, and slipped them into my bag. When I walked into court the next morning, I felt invisible again. Same fluorescent lights, same polite smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. Michael stood at the witness stand in his crisp navy suit, radiating charm. He looked like the kind of man people believed before he even spoke. His lawyer began his questioning, voice smooth as honey. "Mr. Lane, could you explain the events surrounding your son's injury?" Michael sighed, perfecting that rehearsed sadness that once fooled me, too. "Yes, Ethan was riding his bike, fell, and broke his leg. It was unfortunate. But Hannah refused to take responsibility for the medical bills." I had to step in. My stomach turned. He didn't just twist the truth, he strangled it. The lawyer continued. "And to clarify, your wife, former wife, refused to cooperate with insurance?" Michael nodded solemnly. "I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen." I felt the heat rise in my chest. My hands trembled under the table. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Karen leaned close and whispered, "Stay calm. Let him talk." But I couldn't. Not this time. Not when I knew exactly what was on that tape. When the judge finally turned to me, His expression neutral, I said, "Your Honor, I'd like to present an audio recording related to this testimony." Michael's lawyer immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is improper. We've already established." The judge raised a hand. "One moment. Mrs. Lane, what kind of recording?" I swallowed hard. "A conversation between myself and Mr. Lane, recorded in our home, regarding the same incident he just described." The courtroom rustled. Whispers, a cough, the creak of chairs. The judge hesitated. "Is this legally obtained?" "Yes, sir," I said. "It was my home, my voice, my conversation." Michael's lawyer smirked. "She's been recording everything, Your Honor. She's admitted to it." The judge sighed, clearly weary. "We'll allow a brief excerpt. But I warn you, Mrs. Lane, this had better be relevant." I plugged the recorder into the court speaker system. My hands shook so badly that the cable slipped twice before I got it in. The moment the static cleared, I pressed play. There was a crackle. Then our voices, Michael's voice, casual, confident. "Look, no one's going to check those bills." I already told Ethan what to say. "Just let it go, Hannah." My voice, trembling. "That's lying, Michael. He's a child. You can't make him lie. Don't be dramatic. You always blow things out of proportion." "But they'll find out." "Then I'll say it was you." The sound echoed through the courtroom. No one moved. The judge leaned forward. Karen exhaled sharply beside me, one hand over her mouth. Michael's lawyer froze, color draining from his face. And Michael, for the first time, didn't look smug. He looked small. I watched his composure crumble in real time, like a statue cracking under its own weight. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Lane, is this your voice?" Michael hesitated. I don't recall." "Answer the question," the judge snapped. "Yes," he said finally. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there, still as stone, listening to the sound of years of gaslighting unraveling in under 2 minutes. Because that's what it was. Not just proof, but permission to believe myself again. The whispers started. Reporters shifting in their seats. Even my sister, sitting behind me, covered her mouth. Not to laugh this time, but to hide her shock. Emily turned to me, eyes wide, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. The judge dismissed Michael from the stand and called for a recess. His tone had changed, clipped, cold. I knew then that everything had shifted, but all I could think was how many nights I'd sat alone wondering if I'd imagined it all. How many apologies I'd given for simply telling the truth. When the courtroom emptied, I stayed seated. Karen touched my shoulder softly. "You did it, Hannah." I shook my head. "No, the truth did." She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "Same thing, isn't it?" Maybe it was, but it didn't feel like victory yet. It felt like waking up after a long illness. The kind where you forget what health even feels like. As I sat there, I remembered the sound of Michael's voice telling me I was crazy, unfit, paranoid. And then I remembered that tiny click from the recorder, the quiet defiance that started all of this. For years, I thought the recorder was my weakness, proof of my paranoia. But now I realized it was the only thing that had kept me tethered to reality. When everyone around you insists you're insane, sometimes the only sane thing to do is record the madness. Outside, as I stepped into the sunlight, the air felt different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. Like fog lifting off a mirror, people stared. Some out of curiosity, some out of guilt. I didn't care. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. As I reached my car, I paused and looked back at the courthouse. That cold, echoing chamber where they'd all laughed. Now it was quiet. Finally, I whispered, "You heard me." And for the first time in years, that sentence didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a promise. It's strange how victory can sound like silence. No applause, no fireworks, just the soft click of a courtroom door closing behind you. Weeks later, when the ruling finally came through, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the letter that said everything I'd been fighting to prove. Partial custody restored. Financial deceit exposed. Words that once would have made me sob with relief now only made me sit quietly, feeling the weight of years slide off my shoulders. Not gone, but lighter somehow. Justice doesn't heal you. It just stops the bleeding. Michael didn't look at me when the judge read the verdict. He adjusted his tie, nodded once, and walked out without a glance. The man who'd smiled through my humiliation now couldn't meet my eyes. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead I felt empty. Like I'd been holding my breath for so long, I'd forgotten how to exhale. The following days blurred together. Paperwork, lawyers, cautious phone calls from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. My mother left a voicemail saying she was glad things worked out and that maybe we could have dinner soon. My sister texted, "I didn't know." I'm sorry. Funny how apologies arrive once the world has already shifted. When it's safe to believe you again. The first time Emily called me after the verdict, I almost didn't answer. I was afraid her voice would sound distant, polite, obligated. But when I picked up, she was crying. "Mom, I'm sorry," she said. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I wanted to be angry, to tell her she'd abandoned me when I needed her most. But the truth is, I understood. I'd lived under Michael's charm for 15 years. She'd lived under it her whole life. So I just said, "I know, sweetheart. It's okay." And I meant it. Healing doesn't come from revenge. It comes from seeing yourself clearly again. The first few nights after the ruling, I still found myself reaching for the recorder before bed. Out of habit, not fear. It sat there on my bedside table, its red light reflecting faintly off the lamp. For a while, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It had been my shield, my witness, my only friend when everyone else disappeared. But now, it was something else. A reminder that I hadn't imagined it all. Sometimes I'd press play, not to hear Michael, but to hear myself. To remember the woman who refused to disappear, I no longer record conversations. I don't need to. But I still keep the recorder near me, not as proof of what others did, but as proof of what I survived. A few weeks after the ruling, I was invited, reluctantly, awkwardly, to a family dinner at my mother's house. The same dining room where, not so long ago, they'd laughed about my obsession with recording everything. The same table where I'd sat silent, humiliated, while they reassured each other that I'd lost touch with reality. When I walked in this time, the laughter stopped. Not out of hostility, out of uncertainty. They didn't know which version of me would appear, the fragile one they'd pitied, or the woman who had just made the truth impossible to ignore. My sister offered me a seat and poured wine before I could ask. My mother kept touching my hand, as if to confirm I was really there. I smiled politely, small talk filling the gaps where judgment used to live. Then, inevitably, someone brought up Michael. "He's been telling people the court was unfair," my cousin said, watching me carefully. That the recordings were taken out of context. For a moment, the old instinct rose up, the need to defend myself, to prove every word. But then I saw my reflection in the window behind her. Calm, still. A woman who no longer needed to explain. I smiled and said, "He's welcome to his version." No one laughed. It was a quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to shout. The kind built from surviving disbelief, from knowing that truth doesn't vanish just because others refuse to see it. After dinner, as I drove home, I realized how different the air felt. The same streets, the same town, but I wasn't walking through it half invisible anymore. That night, I placed the recorder in my nightstand drawer. I ran my fingers over it once, gently, almost with affection. It wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a witness. People still talk. They always will. But now, their voices don't stick to me the way they used to. When someone calls me too sensitive, I think, maybe that sensitivity saved my life. When someone jokes about crazy women with receipts, I think, yes, and thank God for them. Vindication didn't make me fearless. It just reminded me that I had never been weak. I'd just been unheard. Sometimes truth doesn't roar. It hums, low and steady, waiting for you to finally press play. The tape changed everything, yes. But what it really did was change me. It gave me back my certainty, my voice, my right to my own memories. Now, when I look back on that courtroom, on the laughter, the disbelief, the sting of shame, I don't flinch. I smile, because I know something they didn't. That humiliation is temporary, but silence can last forever if you let it, and I didn't let it. They laughed when I pressed record. They didn't laugh when they heard themselves. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly until you finally press play. Protecting your sanity may look crazy to people who profit from your silence. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be erased. What would you have done if no one believed you? Would you have pressed record? If you believe in women reclaiming their voices, subscribe for more true confessional stories of justice, survival, and self-worth.